Welcome to the Private Practice Pro podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping therapists cultivate success. Here's your host, Kelly Stevens.
This podcast is sponsored by Simple Practice. I've been using Simple Practice since 2016, which has helped me run a smooth and profitable private practice over the years. It has simplified everything from scheduling to billing, giving me a better balance between the work I'm so passionate about and the family time I'm not willing to miss out on. Check out the episode notes to get a free 2-month trial of Simple Practice, my preferred all-in-one HIPAA-compliant solution. Welcome back, everyone, to the Private Practice Pro podcast. I am so excited to have our guest here, Dr. Tay. Can you, Tay, tell us, well, first of all, do we call you on social media? You go by Dr. Tay, but do you go by Dr. Tay in real life? And give us who you are, where you're sitting, and all of it.
Yeah. I literally tell families or people I'm working with, like, call me whatever. So my full name is Dr. Taylor Day. I am a child psychologist specializing in neurodivergent affirming care for autistic children and their families. And I really focus on providing support for the whole family. And I got inspired in this field because I grew up, my brother is 10 years younger than me, and he was diagnosed with autism at 23 months of age. And I just saw the journey he went through and how unsupported in some ways my parents were and me in this journey. And I just knew I wanted to do things differently. So when I launched my practice, that's what I was committed to doing.
I love it. I always feel like on this podcast, we talk so much about people's elevator pitch or just like being able to get out exactly what they do. And I'll tell you, that was great. I know exactly what you do. Sometimes, I don't know, sometimes I'll like ramble on for 5 minutes about whatever. And then people forget, but I feel like that's great. So, So specifically, we were talking offline about concierge practice and how your practice is a little bit unique and maybe something that people listening to this podcast haven't necessarily heard of before. So can you give us, we're going to go back in time eventually to kind of how you got to where you are now, but can you just explain to us a little bit about how your practice works on more of a logistical level?
Absolutely. So one of the things was when I left academia a little over a year ago, and I knew if I was going to go into private practice or really clinical work that I wanted to have my own private practice. I was kind of in the entrepreneurial space already, but I was like, there are things that I don't like about traditional care that I didn't feel like were serving the patients or the clients and also the clinicians. And so what I realized by being an entrepreneur, I got to set the terms and conditions of my own business. And so where I came up with this idea, I will say there are other practices that are doing this. They're just few and far between. But from, it was called the MD-VIP program, which is a form of direct primary care. So, we're starting to see like pediatricians and primary care physicians offer kind of higher touch, higher quality services. And I was like, why can't I do this for my services? And so what it ultimately comes down to, and we can go more into the specifics. There's a lot of intentionality in this though, is I give patients much greater access to me. For example, parents can text me in between sessions, ask questions, seek support, and my services are designed in that way. I also do a ton of care coordination. This morning, well, literally, you asked me where I'm sitting. I'm literally sitting in a car right now because I was at a family's house this morning and early intervention was there. And this was the first time for, the new early intervention providers. And the mom had asked me like, hey, can you meet them? I can't be there, kind of loop them in on what we're working on. And so that's really, really common in my practice as well. So it's just ultimately what concierge care is it's a different way of doing therapy. I also do diagnostic evaluations to give families greater access, provide more of that comprehensive support. And as a result, I keep a much lower caseload than a traditional therapist would.
Okay, so let's say somebody picks up the phone and they talk to you and say, I need help, I need services for my child or for my family, what is that phone call? Like, how are you explaining it to them? Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm explaining the question right, but what happens when they pick up the phone?
Yeah. So one little hack, and if other therapists are doing free consult calls, I highly recommend this. I have it where they can book a consult call directly with me. So rather than picking up the phone and calling me or emailing me, they get right on my calendar. And I love doing free consult calls.
Yeah.
I know you do as well.
Yeah,
I feel like it's a good match, or figuring out if it's a good match. But then I also feel like, I can kind of lay out how this is different and have that conversation. So my process is, families can go on, book directly into my calendar. And then I will say I have an assistant at this point who's helping me, but I've pre-recorded videos talking about my therapy process and my assessment process. And
that's amazing.
She'll send the relevant video, and I will say not every parent will watch it ahead of time, but what it allows me to do on this consult call is it's less focused on how I do my services and more focused on what they're needing support on, helping them to feel seen and heard in this process, because that's really important to me.
That's amazing. Okay, so in that video, then, does it explain, like, can they book a certain amount of hours per week with you, or is it a set fee for the month, or how does that work?
So I bill right now on monthly retainers. And so a lot of times, I have my set offers. For example, one-to-one therapy usually involves 5 sessions a month. And I do that intentionally to make it 5 because we're 4 that are child focused. We're talking about their child, but I want to create that opportunity for parents to get the support that they're needing as well. So we have 1 session a month that is more focused on them. And then I also explain, they have unlimited access to me. And I know for some therapists listening to that right now, they're like, what? Like, do you work all the time? And the answer is no. But they can text and email. And then I let them know, my one-to-one therapy package includes all care coordination. So for example, if there's an IEP meeting, that's just part of the monthly retainer that I do. And so kind of laying that out for them and helping them to understand that, you're not talking to me once a week, I'm really honestly involved in this child's life and the family's life and helping with decision making and being a sounding board. I always joke that, I also have a group therapy model too. And this is something I say commonly with that is instead of going to Google for answers, you get to message me and I can answer things for you.
That's amazing. Okay. So how do the boundaries work then? Like, because obviously you don't work all the time. So do you have like certain hours that clients have access to you, or do they just know that you'll likely respond within a day, or how does that kind of work?
Yeah, I don't limit them when they can message. I'll put my phone on do not disturb, that type of thing. But I always say, hey, I'll get back to you within 24 to 48 hours. I will say they know that it's not immediate responses. I usually try to respond same day. Honestly, I'm on my phone quite a bit, and so it's easy just to respond to texts. And usually they're pretty quick responses. If it takes more in depth, then sometimes I'll just set aside time, or I will say I'm a little slower with email, for example. I'll sit down and, compose an email. So parents also know that too, that if they need a quick answer, honestly, they just text me and I'll respond when I get a chance. It feels, because I'm in control of it, it actually feels great. And I enjoy doing it. And I will say it's not just questions. Sometimes parents will text videos of being like, oh my gosh, look what my kid just did. And it's so much fun. So I get to ultimately decide when I respond. If I'm not in the right mindset, then I don't respond at that point. So I think it's more internal boundaries versus external boundaries.
Right. Do you ever use voice memos with your clients?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like
they
all the time.
All know.
I know. I feel like for me, people always say like, send me an email, send me an email, send me an email. And I'm like, I always prefer a voice memo over an email or a text. Maybe just because I'm always running around with my kids, but I'm like, just send me a voice memo. I can listen to it while I'm driving. I can do something else. Like I hate sitting down and having to write an email back. I do it, but I hate doing it.
Right.
You know?
Right. Exactly.
Hence why like we were texting instead of emailing.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. No, I prefer texting too. And they know. Yep. Especially if they're asking something more in depth. I feel like I've learned about myself. I'm a better communicator through spoken language than written language. And so that's one thing that I always err towards. But I also feel like I can be able to fully help them understand what I'm trying to communicate. So a couple minutes on voice memo, those are super easy for me to record. They actually feel less burdensome to me.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
But then they can get more of that global picture and understand some of the language I'm saying. I just think it creates a little bit more of that connection than like written language does.
Oh yeah, 100%. So what would happen if you had a client like, okay, so you have this model and a lot of it is included. So if they have an IEP meeting or something like that, what happens if you have a client who needs more, you know, like who you're from the beginning, you have that initial consult and you kind of suspect like, you know what, they're going to need more of my time than maybe other clients. Do you factor that in or how does that kind of work?
So I will say, and then I will answer your question. I think that families actually use this much less than you'd expect them to, at least the families I'm working with. So I've been pretty blown away of how often I'm not getting texts or emails, but I think it's that perceived safety net that feels very valuable, that if they need something, that I'm there. And so I will say, I think the higher end of like intensity is like what I imagined all my clients to be. So at this point, do I really think I've come across a situation where I'm like, okay, they're needing more? No, but I also, I keep a pretty open dialogue. And so I talk about that with families. And, you know, also I don't accept insurance, as probably people are not surprised hearing this model. I couldn't bill for everything. Yeah. And so then I also have very open conversations about finances and what's possible for them with still holding my own boundaries too.
Right. Yeah. I mean, obviously we're talking about like cash pay practice. I feel like at this kind of level of care. And I know we've had people on the show too who have maybe not the same all-encompassing type of care, but who have models where they are available by phone or they are available by text. And especially when you're working with younger people, like with teenagers or adolescents. I know for me in my practice, I've seen teenagers for a long time. And I actually like, it's hard to not be available by text to them.
Yeah.
You know, like I have some boundaries around it, but so much happens in between sessions. It's different than like an adult coming in and having this like one singular amazing experience, you know, that it's really nice. Like, and I never found that through the years of like the last decade of seeing teens, I never really had a teen that was like texting me 24/7, unless they really needed a higher level of care and we were trying to help them figure that out. Usually like they didn't want to be texting their therapist 24/7. Right. You know, I wasn't the person they wanted to be texting all the time.
Yeah. I do think though, one thing is as therapists, we are helpers. We're in a helper profession and we tend to overextend ourselves and be willing to, and maybe not even having a lot of resentment around that. But that's where burnout comes from. And so one of the things that I'd encourage people to think about is like, okay, are you building that into your pricing, that time? Because your time is valuable. And also, you really have to reverse engineer to know how much you're working, how many patients you have on your caseload that are going to create, you know, what you need it to create. Because this is a job at the end of the day. And I think that I sometimes find that therapists, and myself included, I had to do a lot of work around this, have to do a lot of money mindset work, that we have a hard time charging what we're actually worth. And some of that is driven by insurance saying they don't think we're worth that much, you know, but we are. We're providing such high quality care. And I think
Yes.
challenging, this is my whole motto of my practice, is how can we challenge the status quo? And when the status quo does not serve either the clients or ourselves as clinicians, that's an indicator that we need to be willing to get a little uncomfortable to do something different.
Yes. Oh my gosh, 100%. I mean, yeah. Just that statement alone, I have no response to because I'm still thinking about it. A lot of times on podcasts, I have to be constantly asking another question, but I could not agree more with that exact statement and that exact sentiment. And I like what you said earlier about reverse engineering your practice in terms of thinking about what you need. I often think about, I often will get questions from people, whether it's on Instagram or in any of my coaching calls, where people will say, how do I make X number of dollars and work X number of hours? And I always think it's kind of a funny question. And it's probably one I had early on in my practice too, but it's it really just comes down to math.
Right.
You have to decide how much money you want to make per year. You have to decide how many hours you want to make per year. And then you have to calculate your fees and your rates based on that. And then obviously you have to do some marketing to get to that point. But I don't know. It's interesting. I think as therapists, sometimes we don't think backwards. My mortgage is this, my rent is this. I need to earn this amount of money. Therefore, and I see this many clients and I have this many hours of childcare. And like you said, you have to kind of reverse engineer it into what works for you and your life or your family.
Yeah. I think sometimes too, we do that number and then we're like, oh my gosh, that's too high. I can't charge that. Instant panic sets in. And, again, I think that's some of our programming that we have to work through too. But I will say, going into this, being a helper, and I think we all in, doing private pay have this experience where it's oh gosh, but what about families who can't afford private pay? And I think that there's ways to get creative. I have a long-term vision of where I want my business to go. Eventually, I'd love to have a nonprofit arm where I'm doing scholarships. But for now, what I'm doing, I do spend some of my time doing, free education on my Instagram, constantly. I have a podcast as well. And so some of it too is you sometimes do have to charge that higher rate in order to be able to sustain what you need. And that is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's our brain clicks in of being oh gosh, but is that unfair or is that unreasonable?
Right.
And those stories in our head are just an indicator that okay, we've got some internal work to do on ourselves too.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think so often we tell ourselves, it's all or nothing, right? Either you're in cash pay practice and you're helping no one and you're a horrible person, or you're in insurance-based practice and you're saving the world. And it's not that black and white. You could be in cash pay practice and have some sliding scale spots. You could be in cash pay practice and have no sliding scale spots, but donate money to a cause that you feel good about. And it doesn't even have to be mental health, right? I think sometimes we think about it in this really singular way. If I'm not in working for a CMH or having a ton of low fee spots, I'm not a good person, right? And it's well, maybe you're working in fully cash pay practice at premium rates, and your cause is something totally different that you really want to support and give money to. And but I agree with you. I see people get stuck in this all the time, and I see us get stuck in just the idea that as therapists, as individual therapists, we have to solve this huge problem that we have of lack of accessibility in our country by lowering our fees, and that must be the answer. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't think that that's the answer to a whole systemic problem. No, if anything, I think that's contributing to the problem.
Right. Because then the proof isn't there that something needs to change with the system if we're accommodating. And I always say too, for me, I've learned that having a smaller caseload that I'm more kind of intensely working with, that fits for my personality too. I really like that. if I am in back-to-back appointments all day, that burns me out. And so then my quality of care decreases, and we all have our limits. And so I think that's also something to think about too, is it's not just like how much you're charging per hour, in that session. What else are you doing for, the clients that you're working with? And at the same time, where are your boundaries? Because if you exceed your boundaries, then quality of care decreases, and that's serving no one.
Oh yeah, you're not going to stay in the field very long. You know, if you're hating going to work every day, eventually you're not going to want to do this work, and your clients are not going to see you anyway.
Instead,
Hey therapists, are you listening to the show and thinking, I really want to launch my own private practice, but I have no idea where to start? Make sure to check out Kelly's Private Practice Roadmap course. In the course, Kelly gives you the exact steps you need to open your own thriving practice. You can find the link below in the show notes.
I want to know, what were you doing prior to this practice?
So I was fully in academia. So when I graduated undergrad, well, real quick backstory. I mentioned already, I grew up with an autistic brother. I knew I wanted to go into the autism field. And my question always was, my brother got really intensive early intervention. This was over 2 decades ago. So that was extremely rare. But my mom had these friends their kids were also going through intervention, and watching kind of, progress and all of that. I was like, why do some kids, make faster progress than others? And so I always thought about it from a research standpoint. And so I ended up, before my PhD program, working for 3 years at the University of Pittsburgh, and was like, I want to go into academia. I wanted to be on the academic medicine side, where it was just writing grants. And I knew that. I had so much clarity, even my postdoc, I ended up coming back to the University of Pittsburgh. And that was the same exact time that the pandemic happened. So I was on my clinical internship when the pandemic hit. I actually, real quick story, 6 years of schooling, and I had to sit in my parents' living room for my graduation ceremony. And
my God,
the worst, right? But I also look back at that time, and I think I learned how to be more present in myself. By nature, I'm a very high achiever and always want the next thing. And I learned how to actually find joy in what I was doing, and just felt a disconnect from academia. I started to look forward. I did 1 day of clinical work to work towards licensure a week. And I was like, those were the days that I was looking forward to. And so I knew I needed to make a pivot. And I was like, okay, I'm going to full on leave academia. I remember talking to my boss, who was the most supportive human. And I was like, research just isn't for me. And she's like, I've kind of been wondering. I was writing a grant, and I just, the passion wasn't there. And so then I went from academia just into opening my own practice. That was kind of the pathway.
Wow. Okay. And then that was in 2020, or when was that?
So my practice is only a little under a year and a half old. So that was, I opened my practice in June 2022. I left academia in end of August 2022. I knew, though, I was prepping for it. So I knew that was the plan since February of 2022. But I was on what's called a T32. It's a research grant. And basically I had a payback clause in there that if I left before August 2022, I'd have to pay back every month's salary that I made for leaving early. So I knew I had to stay. But I was like, okay, well, we're going to double down and launch the practice, in my off hours. And so I was able to build that.
Oh, that's great. Okay. So did you do part-time private practice while you were still at your full-time job?
Yeah, exactly.
When did you work?
It was so hard. I will say, being in academia, I had a really flexible schedule. So it was more making sure things got done. But I worked a ton, but I also knew it was short term. I was like, okay, I can do this. And, then when I finally... Actually, in August of 2020, I was like, okay, I actually am making a monthly salary that makes this feasible. Luckily, I didn't know. I did this blindly. It could have gone horribly, but luckily it didn't.
So, okay, what was the hardest part about initially launching them in those first few months of private practice?
To be honest, and I don't mean to be redundant, but I think the money mindset stuff was the hardest, and
Yeah.
like figuring out how to price things and feel good about things and all
Yeah.
of that, and like work through some of the foundational business elements too
Yeah.
of like, this is a business. And it's really interesting being in these Facebook groups. Sometimes I like see conversations from therapists, and I'm like, I sometimes think that as therapists, we forget that if we own our own private practice, we are business owners. And it's,
Yes, I think people forget that all the time. Like,
Yeah.
it's shocking to me. Like, I don't know how, because you pay your taxes each year and you meet with an account. I mean, like, there's very business elements, but I agree with you. People forget.
Yeah. And so
For sure.
for me, I knew I wanted to go really heavy on the business foundations. I have a business
Right.
coach who's not in the field whatsoever
Right.
that I work with,
Yeah.
and learning all of the intricacies of that it was hard though,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
she was the one being like, okay, you're undervaluing yourself. And I was like, are you sure? And she's like, yes.
But maybe helpful to have somebody who isn't a therapist. Like, I feel like sometimes being able to talk to people in other areas of healthcare or just business in general can be really helpful, because I realize so many of the myths we tell ourselves as therapists.
Yeah. Absolutely. And here's the thing, coaches charge way more than we are as therapists.
Yes. Oh my God. It drives me nuts. But
And that was some of it. And she's like, Taylor, like, these people are charging this. Why wouldn't you charge this? Like, you have this area of specialty and you've really niched down, and, you can deliver value. And the really interesting thing too, at the time I started working with my business coach, this wasn't true. And she's very open about this. Her son ended up getting diagnosed. So he's autistic too.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool. Sometimes I'll say to her, like, okay, put your mom hat on for a second, and so being able to have people, though, you can bounce ideas off of. And I do agree, staying within therapists. I love collaborating with other therapists so much, but sometimes we all learned the same thing. And so it's harder to break status quo in that way.
Oh, 100%. Like, I know for me, I do some one-to-one coaching, and I'm not taking on anyone new right now, but I do have some one-to-one coaching clients that are therapists building businesses. And I charge $350 an hour for those sessions. And I get a fair amount of flack when, like, I say this in a public place, of people being like, that's exorbitant, that's whatever. And so recently I was looking for somebody to do some consulting with me in my business about social media management, and specifically in growing my team and how to streamline and manage my team. And so I reached out to like an industry leader in the social media space about having a one-to-one session with him. And I get an email back with a contract, and his hourly rate was $2,400 an hour.
That's it.
Okay. And like, granted, like, I cannot afford that by any stretch of the imagination, like this 1 hour. But I thought about it. Like, I thought, like, okay, is this valuable enough to me that I'm going to sit down and type out a list of questions and, record that Zoom and go as fast as I can through it? And obviously I can't afford to do that anyway. But it made me realize in the moment, I was like, oh my God, like, I'm self-conscious of my $350 an hour fee. And meanwhile, this person who's great and is a specialist in their area, but probably has a lot less education and experience than I do, is charging, many times more than what I charge.
Yeah.
And it was a good reminder,
It is.
So
But
those therapist Facebook groups can get gnarly.
Yeah. People pay for, I'd say, they pay for the transformation that you're going to deliver them.
Yeah.
They're not paying to sit in front of you for an hour. And I think that's something that we confuse as clinicians, is that we're like, oh, well, it's this hourly rate, but you also have to think about what impact this is going to have on their life, and the work we do is so impactful. I think we forget that sometimes too.
Oh, 100%. Well, and I like, the model that you're working in with concierge, because it allows people to focus more on that, that transformative piece or the transformation, and having that all-encompassing circle of care, rather than just worrying about, was she here for 50 minutes or not? You know, because I think sometimes that also happens. And I see that in my work with teenagers, is the parents are like, they only talked for 43 minutes. They have 7 minutes left. They need to go back in and talk longer. And I'm like, your 16-year-old talked to a total stranger for 43 minutes. It's like a miracle.
Right.
You know?
Right.
But that, and I get, it's a parent. I get that, why that would be and all of that. And, but yeah, I agree with you. I don't know. Going on a tangent. Okay. So tell me, if somebody was interested in this model of care and they were thinking to themselves, you know what, I might open a concierge practice. I don't know. What is something you would suggest they pay attention to from the very beginning?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, I think I almost would backtrack. And this is my model because I figured out that this is exactly what these families were needing. It wasn't like I just decided to package it in this way. I really evaluated what is needed here. And that's why, you know, I have 5 sessions a month in my, you know, 1-to-1 therapy package. Is I was like, parents need a space to be able to get their own support, to be able to process things, ask all the worry questions that they have in their head, you know? And so I think taking a step back of the population you're working with, what type of supports are they needing, and designing things from there versus trying to take the model and apply it to your population. That's the whole point of concierge, is it's tailored, it's, you know, niched. And listen, I have these packages. And like I said, I have a group therapy offer that, you know, it's all done in a group. It's just kind of dialed back, but it follows the same pattern. But I also will work on like hybrid models. I literally just sent an email last night. The mom was like, hey, can you follow up with this in writing? And can we consider a hybrid model between group and 1-to-1? I'm like, yes, you know? So I'm responding to the need. I'm not saying this is exactly what I want it to be and trying to make it work because it might not work, you know, for your patient population.
I think that's huge. I mean, I think like what you're saying of like first looking at what the needs of the client might be and then designing care around that, something we don't think about very often. No. And I know a few years ago, I met a therapist who worked with like late adolescence teens. So like 17, 18, maybe 16, 17, 18, getting ready to launch into young adulthood. And she would provide these sessions where the teen would pick like the 5 most important adults in their life. Okay. Like, so it might be their parents, it might be a coach, it might be whatever. And the therapist would meet with them and the teenager together, and they'd have 5 conjoint sessions basically to say like, these are the people that are in your day-to-day life that support you. Let's like strengthen this whole system as you launch out into like young adulthood and you're gaining wisdom and information from them, but you also need their support, but you also have some conflict with them. And, you know, like I didn't know anyone else that was doing that, but for the population of kind of these like launching into adulthood, high achieving girls, this was something that was really valuable and was kind of a problem she was solving, you know? And I think that's exactly what you're talking about, is you have to think about the unique needs of the clients that you work with and then design around it. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wasn't trained in, well, in my PhD program, I wasn't trained in family therapy. It was very child focused. And often sometimes we'd still have parents part of session, but they were coming in. But luckily, so I did my clinical internship at Duke, and they have a really huge like family and couples clinic. And I got training in family therapy, and I was like, oh, this is a different way. And so I mentioned this as an example too, that even if you are, you know, that's not your area, there's so many different ways of learning, and it can really pivot your business too. I mean, another great example of this is being neurodivergent affirming. I was 1,000% trained in terms of autism in the medical models definition. And you know how I'm largely learning is social media, you know, and it's like listening to autistic voices and listening to other therapists and learning. And so I also want to just say that even if like you were trained one way, there's ways to break out of that. And that's going to greatly be able to solve these quote unquote problems that your patients are presenting with.
Yeah, I love that. Dr. Tay, the last question I have for you is the one I ask everybody.
Okay.
Which is, what's one thing you want to tell somebody who's just starting their private practice today?
Yeah, such a great question. I think one of the things is and I've said this throughout the episode, is not being afraid to break status quo. And, and sometimes that status quo means that you need, and I know you talk about this, that you have to go work in an agency of some sort first and get this training before you can do it. No, you don't have to do that. Or, it also might be like, well, everyone says I need to have evening slots. If that doesn't serve your life, then don't have evening slots. And so I think not being afraid to put yourself at the center of this, that it's not selfish, and realizing you're going to be such a better clinician for the families you're working with, but also your life is valuable too. You are valuable. And so do what you need to do to, I always say, it should light you the F up, And
preach, man.
Yeah.
Yes.
And if it doesn't, then you need to do some rearranging. And so I'd start early rather than having to be, I love with families, I talk about reactive versus proactive. You could be reactive and say, I'm going to do it the traditional way, even though because I'm supposed to, or you can shake up everything, be proactive, and design the practice that you want to have.
Yes. Mic drop. Well, thank you so much for being on today. If people want to find out more about you and your practice or refer people to you, where do they find all that info? It's going to be in the show notes, but maybe just tell us now for anyone who's just listening.
Absolutely. So I'm very active on Instagram. It's the Dr. Tay with periods in between. But I also, if you want to talk about cases, I do case consultation too, in terms of neurodivergent affirming care. You can email me at admin@drtaylorday.com. You can also share that with patients, and I'll do free consult calls with them as well. So I love being able to not only support patients in moving forward, I do both diagnostic evaluations, one-to-one therapy and group therapy, but also to help move the field forward as well.
Awesome. Well, and tell us the state that you're licensed in.
Oh, we didn't talk about that. So I am licensed in Pennsylvania, but psychologists have an active compact. And so I practice telehealth in 40 states currently, which is, I hope the field goes this way because
me too.
It makes no sense. I'm the same clinician to the patients in Pennsylvania versus the patients in Florida,
Right. Okay, perfect. So anyone listening to this, 40 states, I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on.
Thank you for having me. This was so much fun.
Ask Kelly Anything is just around the corner. But first, a word from our sponsor. Stay tuned for Kelly's response to your private practice questions.
Therapists, do you want more clients at your full cash rate? Mentaya is a platform that navigates out-of-network benefits for clients. They get clients on average 70% back on therapy by filing claims and chasing down insurance companies. They handle literally everything so that you can focus on what matters. Click the link in the show notes to learn more and get 1 month free using the code PRO. In today's Ask Kelly Anything, we are talking a little bit about picking niche, so I'm going to play today's voicemail.
Hi, Kelly. I have a question for your podcast. My question is, how do you figure out your niche when you're still unsure of which population you want to focus on working or which specific niche? I've been working as a school counselor for a while now, for about 15 years, and I recently started my private practice on the side. But although I enjoy working with teens, it's not the only population I would like to focus on working. So I guess my question would be, what do you recommend as far as marketing yourself and your private practice when you're still unsure of your niche and you're still trying to figure it out through getting more experience working with other clients?
All right, so this is a great question. This person is asking, how do you, number one, pick a niche when you're interested in lots of different types of clients? And number two, when you're still unsure, how do you market yourself? So this is kind of a two-parter. Let's first go with how do you pick it? So there is no one right way to pick a niche. And I have actually a whole niche workbook on this, which I'll link in the show notes below, that walks you through a lot of different prompts and scripts and that sort of thing about picking your niche. So make sure to check that out. But, the first thing I always tell people is really to listen to the clients and the situations that get you excited. So there are going to be times when you're sitting with a client and you just feel like you're in the flow. You feel like you're really impactful. You feel energized by sitting with them. And even if it's a really tough situation, you feel like, you know what, I'm doing good work here. And when that happens, I want you to write down in a notebook or on your computer some of the characteristics that client might have, whether it's common issues they're facing or an age range, or maybe something that they're struggling with that you're noticing other clients struggling with. And if you start writing those things down, you might start noticing some trends. But that really comes from sitting with a lot of different types of clients, which is often why I tell people that pre-licensure can be a really good time to kind of try out lots of different types of therapy, because something might appeal to you that you didn't necessarily expect. Now, the caller on this question is saying, I've been in the field for 15 years or longer, and she's worked as a school counselor and worked with teens, but doesn't necessarily want to work with them in the future. So what I would say is maybe you spend a few months when you first open up your private practice, kind of exploring different niches. Here is the only problem with that. The only problem with that is, often I think of the fact that we just get one or two sound bites for referral sources. So if you go out and you start marketing your practice as kind of a generalist, and then 6 months from now you decide, you know what, actually I'm a specialist in this one area, you're going to have to go back and kind of explain that to your referral sources, and that can feel maybe a little wishy-washy to them or can be confusing to them. So what I might do is pick one or two people who you're going to reach out to about the initial stages of your private practice and let them know that you're kind of a generalist. But don't do a huge marketing push where you reach out to every possible referral source when you haven't really decided what you specialize in. So maybe you start out part-time in private practice. You don't jump in full-time right away, but start out by just talking to one or two referral sources, getting referrals in different areas, and then picking your niche. And then once you've picked it, really jump into full-time practice. I suggest if you're going to be jumping into private practice and you're going to be investing your time and effort into creating this business, I really do suggest that you have a niche pretty early on. It's hard to fill a practice as a generalist. It's a lot easier to fill it when you have a niche. So I suggest whether you work in a group practice first or you just talk to a few referral sources, I wouldn't spread a wide marketing net until you're really certain about who you want to see and how you can help them. I hope this helps.
Are you wondering how to promote and fill your private practice? Look no further. Kelly's comprehensive online course, Marketing for Therapists, will equip you with the essential marketing strategies to build a thriving six-figure therapy practice. Don't miss out on this opportunity for success. Check out the show notes to sign up.
If you would like to be featured on Ask Kelly Anything, I love getting listener questions from you guys. Anything about private practice goes. And the best way to do that is actually just to give me a call and leave me a question on my voicemail. So I'm going to tell you the phone number right now and make sure to write it down. Here it is, 805-243-8241. I'm looking forward to hearing from you.